What's up, everyone? Steven here with Neural DSP on another episode of Inside the Machine. Today, I'll be talking with Carson Slovak. He's a Grammy-nominated producer and audio engineer working out of Think Loud Studios in York, Pennsylvania. He's worked with such bands as August Burns Red, A Scent Like Wolves, and Rivers of Nile, and many, many more. Carson is also a founding member and the bass commander of the Star Wars-themed band Galactic Empire. And here's my conversation with Carson Slovak.
Awesome. So I'll have made a little introduction for you, but if you could give us a brief history of your work in audio, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. My name's Carson Slovak. Been working on making records for about 15 years. And, well, more professionally in the last 7 or 8 years. And I've been, I have a partner, a production partner named Graham McFarland, and he and I have been working together for about the last 7 years. And it's just a great team. He focuses mostly on vocal recording, and I'll focus mostly on instrumental recording. And then we kind of just put our heads together. So we've got a pretty good process, good workflow going together. And it's been great.
Fantastic. It's true that the guitar player of Live got you into audio in the first place?
Pretty much. He, I grew up, he was my next door neighbor when I was a kid growing up. So, obviously, I was I was really stoked to have someone in a band that I was a fan of, kind of be, around and teaching me things here and there. And when I was in a band myself, when I was a teenager, 18 or something, he produced an EP for us, and it turned out awesome. And just that whole process got me really. It was cool just having a guy I was a fan of, in such close proximity, because obviously, eventually he started teaching me things about music and production, and just got me interested in the whole process. And he produced an EP for my old band, and that really kind of solidified, me wanting to be a music producer and engineer. So, his name's Chad Taylor. He's definitely very instrumental, in no pun intended, in getting me into production.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and he actually is the current studio owner of the studio I'm working out of now too. Because he and his band members built a really nice top of the line recording studio in York, PA, and it was just kind of around the same time that they were looking to open it up as a commercial venture, that my partner Grant and I were looking to make a move out of our old facility. So it just kind of worked out, and now we're up there working there. So it's cool to kind of still be, in such close proximity to the guy that kind of got me into audio in the first place, which is interesting, but it's cool.
That's pretty dope.
Yeah.
Let's focus a bit on your relationship with Grant McFarland. I think that's really cool that you guys have a partnership together and kind of shore up maybe not exactly weaknesses, but you guys kind of complement each other's skills on productions, where he takes care of the vocals, you take care of the instrumentals, and kind of work together on that. So why don't you describe the dynamics of the relationship and the workflow that you guys have?
It's interesting because a lot of people kind of tell us that we're an old married couple, and that's definitely true. I think we work together really well, and we've got, he's my best friend, but being someone's best friend, it's easy to get into that thing where you're spatting with each other, and it's totally like an old married couple kind of thing, but it works really well. I trust him to make all the kind of the same creative decisions that I would make, at least what I would consider to be, appropriate. But at the same time, he brings another kind of perspective on things that I might not have otherwise thought of, and vice versa, I think. So we complement each other a lot. The cool thing about our process is that typically he'll be in one room recording vocals, and I'll be in the other room recording instrumentals. And that way, we can take a break and kind of step out of the room and go into the other guy's room and see what they've been working on and listen to it with objectivity. And it's cool because that really gives us a chance to, keep fresh ears on everything and give each other input as we track. So it's a very organic process, but it's good to have two heads in it with both with kind of relative objectivity. And the artists seem to really like that too. Aside from the fact that with this setup, we can kind of get twice as much done at once. We also, I think, being able to just focus in on one thing each gives us a chance to, just like focus in and think more about what we're doing and, really get the best that we can and not cut any corners and, not take our attention away or anything like that. So it's definitely like a good workflow for us, and we've just gotten really used to it.
Awesome. So I think in a previous interview, Grant mentioned that you guys met in like 2004, 2005, which means that you guys have been working together the last 7 years, you mentioned?
Yeah.
So you guys were friends.
Level.
Okay, so you guys were friends before you guys started working as a partnership.
Yeah, we were. Actually, it's interesting because I had started recording bands, I think, in around 2005, just for free and then for very cheap, just kind of out of my apartment when I was just kind of starting to get into the whole thing. And Grant's high school pop punk band came and recorded with me, and it was actually like one of the first like 3 or 4 bands I think I'd ever recorded, and we just remained friends since then. We were in another band together after that a couple years later, and then eventually just started working together, as producers. He was in a touring band called This or the Apocalypse, and he had started kind of working on production on his own just with a laptop, and he was able to do really great sounding things with very limited equipment. And he would always send me stuff that he was working on to listen to, and I would give him advice, and I'd send him stuff too, and he would give me advice. So it kind of naturally got to this point where we were like, hey, why don't you come work over at my place? Because he had just at one point, he, I guess, got sick of touring and he quit This or the Apocalypse. So he started to focus on production more. And then that was kind of the point where we started working under the same roof. And then eventually we realized that it was a very good workflow if we just started putting our heads together on projects, instead of doing separate projects and, independently. But yeah, it just kind of naturally grew into what it is, now with our arrangement. And yeah, it's interesting to see kind of like where we started off, where I was like recording bands out of my apartment. He was in high school in a pop punk band that, was trying to sound like Blink-182 or something. And now we've got this professional relationship. But it's a great workflow, and we really enjoy it. So
that's awesome. So it was a very natural transition then, because you guys worked together like out of friendship beforehand and like were communicative with each other, and and then just kind of like developed into something bigger. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he started out as my client, and then we just kind of grew together on separate paths, and then eventually, it made sense to work together. So here we are. And we're also in a band together again now. So where we dress up.
So that's how Galactic Empire then started, right? Because it started with the Bubba Fett drum video just going like super viral, and then started kind of growing from there.
Yeah, pretty much. Grant, I guess he got bored. We're both big Star Wars fans, and obviously, and I think Grant a couple years ago had the idea to just do a drum video where he just played along like this arrangement that he made to the Imperial March. And he put that up, and we actually, not really much came of it actually. And then So he made this drum video, and then about like a year or two later, we thought it would be cool to revisit that drum arrangement that he made and just record all of the rest of the orchestra, but on like guitar, metal style. So we did that, and then we thought that sounded so cool. We were like, okay, well, why don't we do some of the other Star Wars music? And then we did, and it was just kind of like a fun little project that we had in downtime. And eventually we had a bunch of songs, and then we were like, well, wouldn't that be hilarious if we made a music video, like as a joke? And then we did that. And then I came up with the idea of like, why don't we just dress up like Star Wars characters and make a music video? And it just kind of snowballed into this really ridiculous thing that ended up like that. Our first video ended up having a pretty strong viral response, and then it just kind of grew from there. And now we're actually playing real shows as a real band. So,
right. Yeah. I think you just played for like a crowd of like 18,000 people or something like that. Like it was like a sold out show recently.
Oh, in Japan. Yeah.
in Japan.
We played 3 shows with Babymetal in Japan, and they're like massive over there.
Yes. I love Babymetal. They're the best.
Yeah, they're great.
They're awesome.
They're awesome. Their show is phenomenal. It's just their light show and the choreography and just everything about it is just so top notch. It's super impressive, and it was awesome to go over and play with them. It was like super mind blowing.
That's cool. That's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're like I love the Duel of the Fates cover that you guys like.
Cool.
It's probably one of my favorite scores, and you guys did a really, really great job of like just the orchestration and the layers and everything like that. I thought it was a fantastic job. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one goes over really well live. We like playing that.
Yeah, no, I actually was really happy because I got to see you guys play at the Unstoppable Recording Machine Summit.
Oh, so right on.
I was one of the attendees, so I got to see
sick.
you guys in like up close and personal. It was really cool. It was very,
awesome,
very
man.
fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I had a great time. That was a really cool thing to go do.
Yeah, no, it was a great show. I loved the event. Like it looks like it's so much fun to be up on stage doing that. Like, and I think that's something that's missing with a lot of metal bands is just the fun element.
Definitely. I mean, we obviously it's supposed to be humorous, we certainly don't take ourselves very seriously. This is just kind of like, we all kind of consider it just kind of like a fun excuse to go take a vacation once in a while and go do something fun. And we've been fortunate enough where we're not like going into debt with this band. Like it's paying for itself, which is great. And we can just go play once in a while. But I mean, it definitely is a lot of work. And the playing in the costumes is absolutely 100% uncomfortable and awful, but and like very difficult. But it's worth it because it is fun, and it is cool to be able to go do something like super goofy and just like have a good time with it. And people seem to enjoy it. We've been noticing that a lot of like people who are obviously kind of like older Star Wars fans are like now bringing their little kids out to shows and everything. And the kids get like real stoked. And I have 2 kids, and for me, it's just like, it's really cool to see little kids, show up at the shows and have a great time. And for me, that's like, if we can make a little kid, get like real stoked and freak out, then I'm having a good time, So
right.
It's a cool thing that we can go do.
That's really cool. So do you guys have any shows coming up, or are you I think you're working on an album, or did you release it? We are kind of working on some ideas for an album, which I guess I shouldn't go into too much yet, because I don't know if the other guys want to like make any formal announcements about what we're doing. But we are working on some stuff, and we do have some touring plans. We're going to be going to Australia in November, so that should be cool, and some other stuff in the works. But yeah, we've kind of been, taking it a little slowly this year. We just went up to Montreal and played a festival up there a couple weeks ago, and that was a lot of fun.
But yeah, some more shows near the end of the year, and then hopefully some new music at some point soon next year, I would say.
Awesome. Switching over to the production, recording, mixing sort of side, like I just listened to the new Era album that you worked on. Like it's
sick.
It's pretty smashing, dude. Yeah,
thanks,
it's pretty
man.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Neural DSP crowd, you know, we have like a lot of producers, we have a lot of guitar players and bass players, like, you know, so I kind of want to like, you know, in talking with producers, I want to get sort of what should musicians do to be received well by producers and engineers? Like, what are things that bands like Era do coming into the studio make your life easier, you know, or make the process simpler?
Well, I mean, I think it really just comes down to preparedness, you know, overall. Even if bands kind of want to explore different creative options in the studio and spend time on that, I've found that a lot of times they tend to come in with a pretty good groundwork, kind of like a foundational thing at least. And if you have that, then it kind of gives you something to build off of. And in the case of Era, they came in and did that single with us, and they were super prepared. Like they had everything very like well thought out already. You know, Grant and I still gave input and stuff, but it was very much like kind of a complete vision already. And, you know, we really kind of just recorded it. And they're just such a great band and like super talented songwriters and players. So it was an easy experience, and they're great guys too. It's interesting because two members of that band were in two other bands that Grant and I recorded in the past. Connor, their bass player, was in a band called I the Breather, who I think they broke up a couple years ago, but we did their last album, and then their singer JT was in Texas in July. So already kind of like knowing those guys going in, it was a really fun experience. And Jesse's like the man. He's really, really great dude, very super nice, very humble, and they're just really an awesome band. We were stoked to work on it. So
that's cool. So do you prefer having a band come in with the full vision, or do you like getting your hands in on like the creative side of that?
We definitely like getting our hands in on the creative side. But at the same time, if a band comes in and they've got something thought out to the point where we would just be making lateral moves, then we tend to leave it alone. I think it really comes down to where the song is at. You know, Grant and I have recorded bands before where they'll come in and and they do all the stuff that we would have done, you know, and we end up not really having to change much. And then there are other times where a band will come in and it's very, you know, the ideas are there, but they're very basic and they're very kind of like not really developed yet. And we'll, in that case, you know, basically it's what I'm saying is I think it's a case by case basis, you know. Like I don't want to just change something for the sake of changing it. If it's good and I don't think it could be any better, or if it's different, is it just as good and just different, you know? And in that case, I would tend to just say, this is good, let's do it. But then other things, obviously, you know, you need to work on a little bit. And obviously every band is different and what they need and want are different things. And, you know, when they come in and they really want our input, we're really stoked to be able to, you know, get our hands dirty and help with songwriting and arrangement when we have the opportunity. So
that's really cool. So you've done the URM, you know, Nail the Mix a couple of times, and you can kind of see that there's like a thirst for the knowledge and the experience and kind of wanting to learn all those aspects. What sort of advice would you give up and coming producers and mix engineers that are just getting into it? I can really only draw from my own experience, and that's just that I think you just need to dive right into it. And, you know, there's only so much you can learn by reading about something or watching videos online. And while those things are extremely helpful and can definitely, I mean, I've learned things from watching those videos that I had no idea about before, you know, and I've been doing this for over 10 years, you know,
And it's just one of those things. Technology is changing so quickly, you'll never stop learning new things. So I'd say keep that, thirst there to learn, but also you just got to at some point do it. You just got to start recording bands. And even if it's for free or for like no money, very little money, just get into it. And the more you do it, the more you'll learn. I think that's the best way to learn in this field is by doing. So, it's trial and error, a lot of things. And not every band is a complete variable. You have different problems, different, potential issues to mitigate, and different challenges, different creative needs. And, you just have to kind of work on getting good at, communication, but also psychology, because, you need to make your artists comfortable or else they can't give you good material to work with. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I feel like there's a lot that goes into being a good producer or a good engineer. But to me, the best advice I could give anyone would be just to do it as much as humanly possible for the experience and to learn from that, because that's the most. If you mess something up a million times and then finally get it right, you know that you will remember it, So, if you mess something up a million times and then you finally get it right, it's going to stick, So I think the best way to get good at anything is just by doing it and putting in the hours and keep going. I'm never happy with anything I'm doing, so that's what motivates me to keep trying to get better, And it's like, it's a journey. It's a marathon. It's not a race. That whole thing.
Yeah. What are some things that you find, like what's common bad advice that you see floating around online?
It's weird. I feel like really anything that implies there's a right or wrong way to do something, because I feel like in this field, there are so many different routes to the same goal that you can take. And, some might be better for some situations and others might be better for other situations. It's all kind of context dependent. So for me, like any information that's out there online that is essentially implying that, this is the right way to do this, or this is the right way to do that, and this other way is not correct. I think that's bullshit. To me, it's like, I've learned everything that I know. I didn't take any formal education, so I've learned everything I know by just watching other guys and seeing what they do and saying, oh, that's interesting. That would probably work for what I want to hear, but maybe not this other thing he does, and then you're just kind of a collection of these different little tidbits that you see from different people, I think. And if you can kind of adapt that to your own workflow and make it work for what your ears want to hear, then that's the best way to do it. And there are a million different ways you can do all that. So, yeah, I can't really think of any specific like information or things I've seen, videos I've seen online that I just think were, total bullshit or anything. But I'd say if there's anything out there that's, very definitive, like, okay, this is the way that you track bass, period. Like, I don't think, I'm not going to track a certain instrument, the same way for every band. It's going to be different every time depending on what they're doing and what band they are and what they're going for, what kind of players they are, all these variables. And it's so dependent on that specific thing. So like, to me, I feel like one of the things that I always strive to get better at is adapting to things outside of my comfort zone. And that's why I like recording. We record a lot of like heavier bands, like metal bands and everything. I like recording heavy bands, but at the same time, I really like when we record, once in a while we'll record like an oddball genre, and it just totally throws us for a loop. And to me, that's great, because getting out of our comfort zone and being forced to kind of adapt and figure out, new creative problem solving methods, that to me is the way that you learn. That's the way you get better. So yeah, I guess I kind of went on a tangent there. I'm not sure.
No, that's all right. That's all super valuable, and it was spot on. Like cool. I agree absolutely. Being flexible, being willing to adapt and learn and experiment and try new things. Like I think that's 100% super on the nose. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's the same with any artistic pursuit, really. I think that applies. That, I mean, what really great new innovations have ever come out of just doing the status quo? You know, you got to try new things. You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to fuck some stuff up. You got to, you know, work with lots of different types of music and figure out your own unique way of producing it. And I just think that's all part of the journey, you know, of becoming a good producer or engineer.
I find this interesting because it feels so counterproductive to the movement that I've been seeing in production and mixing. Is that, like, you know, the speed mixing, the templated sessions and everything, having everything that you can just lock into a track and then just go and try and bust it out as quickly as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like I think that there's like sort of a balance to either side, like being able to do things quickly, but also having the time and ability to be flexible and experiment outside of that. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's important. I mean, one of the most important things to Grant and I is, you know, good use of time and scheduling efficiency. You know, we like to show up at a certain time and leave at a certain time, and we work certain days in the week, and it keeps everything kind of locked down. The worst thing that you can do for your creative part of your brain is to be disorganized on a logistical end, because that just makes it way harder to focus on the creative and get all that other stuff out of your head. You know, Grant and I like to be very time efficient and use a lot of, you know, principles of, you know, proper scheduling and organization. And, you know, he has his role, I have my role with how we make the business run, you know, and like it just kind of it's a working, you know, kind of machine. And it just takes all of that stuff out of our brains if we can just like keep it locked down and focus on being creative and doing what we do. So like, while we really like to be very time efficient and use a lot of these, you know, principles, at the same time, you do have to realize that you can't just, every different band doesn't fit into the same template. So you have to be able to be efficient and everything, but there's a balance, like you said, you know, you have to stick with attention. Right. Yeah. I absolutely. Yeah. So you guys are pretty regimented with your schedule then, yeah? Yeah, we'll work 6 days a week, and usually like just a good 8-hour day, solid 8-hour day, but we don't like mess around either. Like we'll eat lunch, but otherwise we're working, you know? So, right. You know, and at the same time, like, it's not like balls to the wall where, you know, people are under pressure, and it's not like one of those things where it's like super like, I mean, we like to get stuff done and we like to be efficient, but at the same time, we don't rush through anything. You know, we definitely take our time, take our artist's comfort level into consideration, and you know, it's all very important stuff. But we do like to be kind of locked down with our schedule just so we can put it out of our brains, you know what I mean, and just focus on the work. No, it's interesting you mentioned, like, as far as like the organization, like even just like the spatial clutter, like it seemed like you're pretty meticulous about keeping everything organized and clean. Yeah, I'm pretty OCD for the most part with regard to studio cleanliness. It's always more disorganized than I'd like, but you know, you just kind of got to roll with it. Studios will definitely. I don't think the studio's ever been completely organized, but that's just, I mean, we're working all the time, so it's that's just how it goes, I guess. But that's what the intern's for, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. was something I actually kind of wanted to ask you about. So I was listening to one of the previous interviews, and it was on the URM podcast. You guys got off on an interesting tangent about AI.
Oh yeah,
and I thought that was really fascinating. I thought so. Is that something that you follow?
I mean, as much as anyone else. I'm not like an expert. I've listened to the Joe Rogan podcast. I've read an article or two, but I'm not like a master physicist or a computer genius or anything like that. So I've got a very kind of elemental understanding of all this stuff. But it is very interesting to me, the whole concept, and just the fact that it seems like it's very unlikely that we won't get to a point where we will create, a sentient artificial consciousness. And that to me is very interesting just because it opens up all kinds of ethical questions, like, does this computer have rights now? Type of thing, It's tough. It's a really weird, I feel like we're kind of, at least from everything I'm seeing, we're kind of on the cusp of that technology. So once it gets there, say, give it 50, 100 years, maybe even less, I just feel like it's going to change a lot of different things, it seems kind of tinfoil hat-esque, but I mean, it's not that far outside the realm of possibility if you think about it,
When there are people such as like Sam Harris and Stephen Hawking, like talking about.
I just read Letter to a Christian Nation. Actually,
I love that book.
Read it the other day. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, no, Sam Harris is. I'm a big fan of Sam Harris's work, but
yeah, me too.
But yeah, when those people are talking, like, and they are far smarter than I am, when they are talking about the dangers of AI, I'm like, yeah, I should probably listen to these people. They know far more about it than I do. Like,
yeah. Well, this is something that's like it's kind of a sci-fi-esque concept, so it's easy for people to sensationalize it. But when you've got these, arguably the smartest people in the world saying, like, yeah, this is probably going to happen, and who the hell knows? Maybe we're going to be in the plot of Terminator 2 pretty soon. I mean, right, I hope not. Right. But
I hope not.
It is interesting to think about.
No, it is, and it's interesting because you're seeing these things applied more and more to little things like. Do you know about the Gullfoss plugin?
Yeah. I just actually I just got that plugin. Couple weeks ago. We used it on our last Nail the Mix that we did.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, I still have to check that one out. But yeah, so like you get these like sort of intuitive, it's still narrow AI because it still has like a singular function, but they become more and more sophisticated and sort of, I wouldn't say take some of the artistry out of it, but like are more predictive of what you would want to get out of it. It's interesting.
Yeah. It is. It's crazy to see where specifically audio production technology is going. Just kind of the trajectory of it, and as new technology creates new issues for people, then technology is created to solve those issues, and it's just kind of this self-fulfilling thing that it's. I feel like the audio technology has evolved into this really interesting territory where, also it's kind of enabling so many people to, make really great sounding recordings with a laptop, which is incredible, but then at the same time, there's a lot of people who argue that that's problematic too, because it oversaturates, there's just so much out there now. And then the standard of sonic quality changes over time. It's just interesting to see how all these things affect all these other things,
Right. So what are your thoughts on the modernization and the, advent of like technology when it comes to like the music production stuff like that? Like, Neural DSP is really pushing hard on getting like amp sims to be as, true to the, physical models as possible. And I think they're doing a pretty great job of, I might be biased, but, no, I think they're pretty great so far. Yeah.
They've made some of the best sounding plugins I've used in a long time. I think it just blows my mind how I'm old enough to remember when amp sims and different analog gear modeling plugins just kind of were a joke, just kind of sounded not anywhere near the real thing. And it's crazy to me to see how far they've come and how the gap is closed between the digital and the real world. Just in terms of like the sonic quality of all these things. It's really remarkable, honestly. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. I can't even imagine what music production is going to be like 10 years from now, just technologically, but hopefully.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. That's cool. That's very, very cool. Let's see. Going back to the Galactic Empire a little bit. So you guys have to break down those scores like measure by measure, note by note, and like so John Williams is amazing, but I'm curious if you have any other composers, scores, and stuff that like you particularly enjoy. What are some of your favorites?
Probably Hans Zimmer would be at the top of my list. Alan Silvestri, John Williams obviously always be one of my favorites, just because of all the different, iconic films that he's made. Arguably had a huge hand in making as iconic as they are, man, just really any movie from kind of my childhood, I think, that I grew up with, that nostalgic feeling, those I'll always associate with the scores, because I feel like just in the 80s and 90s, obviously, and still now, it's just some of the most iconic film scores I think were made through that era of film. And, that will always stick with me, like, Indiana Jones and Jaws and Back to the Future, all these movies. I definitely, Grant and I both have a pretty profound appreciation for great film scoring, but I got to tell you, the process of transcribing all of the John Williams music for Galactic Empire is pretty mind-blowing, just because it gives you an appreciation for how that guy's brain works, which is just, you would think that all of these different parts that he has wouldn't work together in the slightest, and they don't make any sense on their own. But then when you put them together, it's just this thing that suddenly makes sense, and it's just wild to me, kind of like, I mean, he's a true genius, he's definitely, one of the rare musical geniuses, and breaking apart his songs into that small level of detail really gives me an appreciation of just what you can do with 12 notes. It's insane. And John Williams doesn't know it, but he writes prog metal, because we didn't change anything. We just played what he wrote on guitar, and then we added drums to it. That was the only thing we wrote, was the drum part. And suddenly you have like a prog metal band, so, yeah, the stuff that he writes is just super ridiculous and incredibly complex. And it's just, I can't even begin to think about where a normal person would start with writing that kind of music,
Yeah, lately I've been getting into a lot of video game scores too. Like,
oh, right on.
So like Mick Gordon and Darren Korb are like some of my favorites. Cool. Especially like Mick Gordon tends to err more on the side of like the metal kind of industrial kind of stuff. Like he just did the Doom soundtrack and Wolfenstein. So he's amazing. I love it.
I love that. What was back in the day, like in the 90s, Trent Reznor did a score for, it wasn't Doom. It was Quake. Was it Quake?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was
Nine Inch
Quake.
Nails did the scores, like this ambient thing. Super cool. I actually really like a lot of his film scoring work too, like The Social Network, and I think like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and some other movies. Didn't he win an Academy Award for
Social Network, right?
Yeah, Social Network. Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I'm a huge Nine Inch Nails fan. So
awesome.
It's cool to see what he does with film.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that crossover because he's known for Nine Inch Nails, but he's also like really, really good at scoring a good film. Like,
yeah. Him and Atticus Ross are a great duo. They make really cool music together, I think.
Mind if we get to some user questions?
Oh no, of course.
All right, so these are from some of the people in the Neural DSP user group. I have Tim Robertson. He asks, what's your opinion on the ultra smashed mix versus a more dynamic approach? Are modern productions really getting worse?
Well, I think the fact that now everything is pretty much dominated by the streaming format, I think a lot of those issues will stop being issues, and kind of to an extent already have. Just with the normalization process, I know a lot that goes into a lot of these streaming services. But at the same time, I think there's definitely something to be said for a mix that is just ruined by too much limiting. I'm personally not a fan of mixes that are like too overly loud, too smashed, because there is a threshold where, if you go past that, it'll definitely start, messing the mix up. So I just think that kind of a more dynamic mix is better most of the time. Some bands like the really smashed sounding, overly loud kind of thing. So again, it's really dependent on the specific band and what they want. I mean, if that's what they want, that's what they want. And sometimes a band wants to sound lo-fi, sometimes they want to sound more loud than anyone else in the universe. And then other times they just want a balanced dynamic mix. And that's kind of what I prefer personally.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree. Let's see. Connor Lazenby asks, I'm curious how different your approach to production and engineering is when working with different genres. For example, working with a band like Polaris versus Carousel Kings.
Okay. Well, like I said before, I just think you have to approach everything based on, the specific band. I think that there are a few overall principles that you can apply to working with any artist, like, having good communication skills. I think your miking techniques are probably pretty much the same in terms of like, I would say depending on the band really, because we've recorded some bands where, everyone's set up live in a room and we tend to mic things a little bit differently or lay things out a little bit differently if we're doing that kind of setup as opposed to tracking everything individually, one thing at a time. We tend to do more of that, the latter. But I do think it's just really kind of dependent on the band. So a band like Polaris was interesting because they're from Australia. And when we recorded that album, they flew Grant and I out to Australia, and we just rented a beach house for a month and recorded the whole album in some guy's living room, basically. We recorded everything except drums in the house. And then the last week we went to a studio in Sydney and tracked drums in a good drum room. But yeah, everything else was very much just kind of like our ghetto setup in a living room. And it was really cool because we kind of were just immersed in the whole thing the entire month and lived with the band there. And, we all became great friends. And, it was a really cool experience. But that was definitely, it's interesting that he chose that as an example because that was definitely a very kind of out of the ordinary scenario for us, because we've never flown somewhere and recorded an album elsewhere before. That was the first time, and it was like we were on a inverse sleep schedule the entire time. So, but yeah, and then for a band like Carousel Kings, they're a pop punk band. So, I think we approached finding tones a little bit differently. It was never as much of like a kind of a heavy metal, like ultra saturated guitar tone that it would be for a more aggressive band. I just think it's really dependent on the music, and your choices are going to be kind of dictated by what the band needs. Like I said, Grant and I have never been the type of people who want to approach everything the exact same way. We like kind of trying different things and trying new things and working with types of music that we haven't before. And I feel like that helps us to learn.
So Tyler Mays, he's one of my fellow URM students. He wants to bring up a point from the August Burns Red Nail the Mix, and he mentions that you break up the drum kit mics into unconventional groups for mixing, something like cymbals, snare and kick, or toms. Do you still do it this way, and what does it help to achieve?
Well, I think in that session, I think I went through a period of time where I was compressing the drums a certain way on the drum bus, and it just sounded better to break up the low end stuff like kick and toms onto its own bus, and then everything else like snare and cymbals to a separate bus, and compress them independently with parallel compression. And I think at the time, the plugin I was using, or the settings that I was into at the time for aggressive parallel drum compression, just sounded better when I split up the low end info. Like I said, I keep trying new things, and I always try to like keep, the workflow new and figuring out different ways of doing things. And so lately I haven't been doing that. I've been just kind of sending everything to one drum bus and using one compressor on the drum bus that has a mix knob and doing the parallel compression that way. And then, using the sidechain filter to, not compress the low end stuff if I don't want to. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of just an example of trial and error. I feel like as a producer, I go through, or as a mixer, I guess, I go through phases of like, I really like this plugin on this or that for this type of music, and so on. But once in a while, I'll try to, try something completely different and then get away from that. And it's just part of the whole journey, I guess. It's ever changing for me. In other words, I feel like I'm constantly using different things on, I've got a couple staple plugins that I like. The Pro Q3 for me, I'm just so used to its graphical interface that it's like kind of comfortable for like a good, just neutral EQ that I can use on pretty much whatever to notch stuff out or, do big moves or whatever. So I'll use that a lot. But otherwise I like to kind of change up, what I use on different things and try different approaches. So yeah, I have not been doing that lately.
Got it.
Got it. Question in short.
Okay. Actually, one of my questions. What are some of your desert island plugins?
Man. Well, I tend to use Pro Q3 a whole lot, and I do really like the Slate plugins. I know some people really like those. Some people really don't like them. I personally enjoy them. I think they sound really good. Man, that Gullfoss plugin is pretty great. And I think a lot of the FabFilter stuff I'm really into, and I've been using a lot of the Slate stuff lately. I like to try a lot of different stuff. I would say Desert Island would probably be
just for the usefulness of it, just all the fab filter plugins. Just because I'm very used to the controls on all of them and the GUI, and I think they do a good job. So yeah. If I had to pick, they probably get the most use.
Oh yeah, no, the Fab Filter plugins are probably some of my most used plugins, like hands down. Between the Pro Q3 and the Pro MB, like those are all over my mix. Yeah.
Same.
Danny Wallen asks, the drum processing on the Polaris record goes hard. How much of it was sample based, and how much was overall processing to get the drum sound?
I'm pretty sure that if you watch, speaking of the August Burns Red Nail, the mix, if you watch that, because that was from a few years ago, I think it was right around the exact same time we did that album, the Polaris album. So the drum processing was probably pretty similar at that point, because it was the same thing, a very heavy sounding album, and I was kind of doing things a certain way at that point for that kind of mix. But if I remember correctly, we tracked all the drums live in a studio in Sydney, and we spent a long time getting pretty good sounds and making sure the takes were great, making sure the hits were all solid, and we got exactly what we wanted. And I believe all I did on that was mix in. I probably blended in kick and snare sample like about 50%. The real kits should all I believe is all there, like cut out the dead space in the toms and gated them and stuff like that. And then aside from that, it would have just been the same type of parallel drum compression, splitting up the kick and toms from the snare and cymbals, and I think some saturation. And that was it. I think that would have been it. Aside from EQ on the shells and stuff,
That's cool. I got one more question from Grant Clements. He asks, did you guys fight over who gets to be Darth Vader?
Well, it's interesting because when we came up with the idea to make this kind of joke band, I guess, our intern at the time was a guy named Chris Kelly, who is Darth Vader in our band. And he was just like as much of a Star Wars nerd as we were. And he was there, and we the three of us kind of came up with the initial idea, and he was the first one to say, I call Darth Vader. And Grant and I were actually fine with it because Grant had his heart set on Bubba Fett from the beginning. And I just wanted to I think ineptitude is really funny. And stormtroopers are the most inept character in the Star Wars universe, in terms of aim and and just not being able to do anything effectively, really. So I thought it would be funny to be a stormtrooper. And of course, I picked the most. I had to pick the most complicated costume, also, with that choice. But no, it was no one fought. We all actually had our own independent ideas of what character we wanted to be. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and, hanging out with me. I love the conversation, and we'll have to do this again.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for checking out this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell icon for notifications. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.